being a relatively new district when it comes to wine compared to its European counterparts, um, has it started to define? And you're talking about Adelaide. So where's Adelaide for the listeners compared to, let's say, downtown Paso?
So it's we're up about from downtown Paso. You drive about 15 miles up,
Up.
not miles, 15 minutes. The mountain, really off 46, I
Like
believe.
Nacimiento direction?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So 2,200 foot peak takes about 15 to 20 minutes to get up to the top. In fact, I think there's also called Adelaida too.
There is Adelaide. Yeah.
But it's it's a very small appellation, 1,000 acres. So it's finding different microclimates.
Yeah, that's
within
not the question.
That's a huge. So, but we really do like to specify that it is the sub-appellation of Paso, which is the Adelaida
Right.
district. So.
Because there's always questions cutting Napa in half, right down Highway 29. The alluvial fans on one side or the other side of the
Yeah.
mountains are different, I'm, you and I were talking about how long we've been tasting wine when you came to see me in the 80s. How long we've been tasting wine when you came to the 80s. Fully comprehend and detect sub-appellation differences. I mean, some of the major ones in Napa, it's the Valley Fruit. That's some of the fairly obvious, but some of the smaller sort of appellations, Oak Knoll versus Yountville kind of things. But how's that happening in Paso? This wine clearly how's that happening in Paso? Is not of the popular in Paso Robles, which is not a fruit-driven wine, which is they're very good, but this really is, and I hate to ask in a sense, at least it's refinement, it's not in its balance and its structure. It has a European flavor to it. So is that from Adelaide, or is that from the winemaking? At least it's refinement.
Well, like anything, it's a combination of factors. Okay, so if you take the fact that we're 2,200 feet up, you're right. Clay calcareous
Huge difference.
limestone. So you have so high density planted vines of 3,600 to 4,000. It's for the most part dry farmed, which is also challenging when you have that kind of. You have optical sorting, you have hand sorting, multiple green harvest runs to make sure that you count. So there's everything that Daniel does is, what's the old saying? The best thing a vineyard can have in the vineyard is, right?
Yeah.
Feet, right?
Yeah.
Feet, right?
Yeah.
So he's learned, he's really.
Sounds like Telechef, actually.
Well, Andre, he has a little historical significance with Paso Robles, but everything that you see in a Grand Cru in terms of the methodology, Daniel has reflected that in his winemaking at
It's clear.
with patrimony.
It's clear.
With patrimony.
It's clear.
But beautiful minerality. Like when you try the wines, the fruit is much more. It's so rich and pure because he also ages in your Grand Cru, Left Bank, Lafitte, Mouton, Aubryon. It's mostly 100% new French oak, right?
Yes. Yes.
18 months to 20 months. Here with Daniel's patrimony, the Cab Franc and the Cave de Leon, you're talking 30 months in new French oak.
Wow.
And I was like, wow,
That's a long time.
right. I'm like, wow.
Time.
Right. I'm like, wow.
Time.
Right. I'm like, wow. Exactly.
And
I was like,
expensive, by the way.
oh my God. Well, just getting a regime is a whole other topic. Using some of the finest barrels, Francais Forest, like Seguin Moreau. These barrels are from like 300-year-old forests that were planted by Louis XIV. In there has these wonderful relationships with these coopers, and his barrels that are a little wider staves.
The grain
and
of the staves themselves.
Yeah, the wider, and they're cured on the mountain. And the density of the wood, because when you're 30 months, as you know, I mean, you don't want the wine turning out. To be like a wood plank on the palate.
Like a popsicle stick.
Right. So you want that wood has to integrate well. So the wood tannins allow the wine to have a great longevity. Lovely kind of flavor that Daniel gets from these barrels, really adds to the complexity and texture of the wine.
You know, it's interesting. I did a Sauvignon Moreau wine barrel Cooper. I can't remember his name now. He's been fourth generation Cooper. He's in Napa. And I said, okay, if I buy 10 barrels from you and I put my favorite cab, everything's the same juice from the same fermentation tank, and I put it in a barrel, and we come back in 18 months, and you have to actually sort which one tastes, which ones you want to use for your reserve, let's say, and which one you want to use for the regular wine. And he says, well, we don't know the wood that's in the first barrel, whether it came from the north side of the forest or the south side of the forest. And that's the difference. I said, okay, I've never thought of that, that the terroir has so much to do with the character that it imparts on the wine.
Right.
And the winemaker's job is to sort of balance this out.
Right. And, you know, I mean, interject, you know, that's also why, you know, the diversity of oak that you buy, Taranceau, Seguin Moreau, you know, imparts a different to the wine. And I think that's why you'll see a lot of great winemakers using a diversity of barrels.
It's funny when we tasted these two wines, and so for the listeners, they have a Cabernet Sauvignon, and they also have a Cabernet Franc, which is rather rare in America. It's varietal, as we know, in California and America. If the wine is 75% of one grape, you can call it that. So that up to 25% of things, it's almost entirely the grape, But do you think coming and born to open, you know, to you get from and behind open, but each or winery, everybody on the matter, hundreds to understanding the terroir, the soil, the ranges, and what's happening, that they understand more about what they're getting.
How does 100%? Yes.
Yeah.
Because, you know, just to give you, well, so Daniel and George bought in 2007. They started producing their Soul of a Lion in 2010. And Daniel started recognizing, to your point, it took a little time to understand the terroir of Dow Mountain, and as he started blocks of cab producing the best fruit, that's when he's, you know, that evolution and understanding of his own mountain and the terroir in that mountain is what of making the Soul of a Lion is what led to producing Patrimony, when he recognized these little beautiful 10-acre parcels in the heart of the mountain, slope, aspect, microclimate. That phenolically, I'm getting some great wine here with great flavor, great texture. The tannins are beautiful. So that's how Patrimony came about, and the first vintage was 2013 of the. So yeah, so having that time frame of understanding your land is you know, when Michael do a lot of different things there with, but you know, Michael Salaci started Opus in the early 2000s. You know, and it took him a progression of time to understand the Tocolon vineyards there. So yeah, you know, I mean, wine is a generational thing. So to have that lady's name in up your
Sylvia.
Yeah,
Saskia.
And that's the ability to understand your land, understand what it can produce, where the best blocks come from. Takes time. I mean, it's not a, you know, that's why wine is, you know, is just the beauty of it is you can lay a bottle, say, of a, like I had recently I had a 82 and 2000 Canelaga from the right bank at Saint-Emilion. And I mean, the wines were so beautiful, but it took time for those wines to really evolve and come to where they.
Yesterday, 2012 Saint-Emilion, I can't remember the chateau, but that was the same experience. And the general public experience, we'd like them to know the experience. We'd like them to understand, what happens to that wine as it ages, and it should be. It's going to take a pedigree of some kind for that to happen. You can't just put anything in a bottle. Like I remember when my roommates out of college were like aging Beaujolais. It's like, no, it's not going to work. You can't do that. So you don't just age a wine. It has to be pedigreed and it has to be structure in the wine before you start to age it.
Right.
And that's an interesting point. So you said Mike Salacci. I had him on the show. He was one of my first podcasts actually when I traveled. Yeah, we had a great teasing him because he grew up in Gilroy.
Yes, right. The garlic capital of the world.
Garlic capital of the world. He goes, I grew up smelling garlic and horse manure because we lived on a farm, a dairy farm.
Yeah.
And I forgot the name. I had pulled out the mascot of his high school. The Gilroy, whatever they were, I forgot now. Mustangs. They're the Mustangs. He's looking at me like, what?
Yeah, it's always good to do your proper research.
Yeah, you got to do research, right? There's another point. That's why I brought it up. Opus, when you drive into Napa, it's just wonderfully designed, but it's beautiful facility. Like you're walking into a mosque, and it's just like amazing culture.
Yeah.
And I had that same feeling, oddly, when I walked into the corporate headquarters of the Panda Express chain. Mr. Chern, you walk in, there's a corporate culture. You just feel it.
Yeah.
How is that different from the French culture of a winery? If you can articulate that, versus something like Opus, which is pretty big concern in the wine business, and then we go to a Dow who's on the roots of war, creating a winery.
Right. So there's a real symmetry or tie-in between all of them, and Daniel having truly, having Middle Eastern roots with a French background, and then going to Cannes and then leave Paris, where they both started to go to high school. There's really that generation between the French and the European culture with George and Daniel, and so everything that they do really has an influence, not just from the French roots, but also from their roots in the Middle East. So that's what I find so fascinating. What I find so fascinating about the brothers is that they really look at things from a super world, not from like an American point of view, not from a Middle Eastern point of view, but also having lived Cannes. They just have a fascinating entrepreneurial streak. I mean, they both left Paris, went to school at UC San Diego, got their master. Excuse me if I get this wrong, but computer and electrical engineering, and they went on to create an internet company that became successful, and but all along they both knew that eventually it's hard in France to, unless you're part of the family, to move ownership of a chateau there.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
So they knew they probably weren't going to be doing anything with wine in France, but once they to America, found their success with their internet company, they went back to their roots of what they grew up wanting to do, which was always to be in the wine world. And so in Rancho Santa Fe, where they lived for a while during after they in the middle of the business